Nice that you made it back. The topic here, governance in a networked world, will be moderated by Markus Kummer. He is the Vice President and responsible for public policy at the Internet Society. And I'd like to quickly introduce the participants here on stage. Virat, Bhatia, please raise your hands if you hear your name. There you go. Lesley, Cowley is joining us. Then welcome Avri, Doria. Then Heather, Dryden. We also welcome Raúl, and please hit me if I pronounce your name incorrectly. Echeberría? About? All right. You'll hit me later. Please welcome Carlos Raúl Gutiérrez, Quaynor, and Jianping Wu. So, Markus, the stage is yours.
Thank you for the introduction. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It is a great pleasure and privilege to moderate this. Okay, I try go a bit closer. Is that better? Yes. I try again. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great pleasure and privilege to moderate this round table. We had great opening speeches. The speeches were more about the technology, and now we're going to talk about the governance of this technology, about past, the history, about the current state of play, and also look a little bit into the future, or try and look a bit into the future. Let me start by introducing a little bit the history. As you all know, and we state on the session description on the website, the Internet developed largely outside the realm of governments. Governments did not notice that there was something taking place, something revolutionary of utmost importance, and the Internet took off. But then in the mid-90s, governments began to get a little bit interested, and 1998 was a key year. That was when the US government decided that they needed to have a more solid structure for dealing with the DNS, and they incorporated the Internet Corporation for Assigned Names and Numbers. And the very same year, there were ministerial conferences of the WTO and of the OECD, and governments then, in their wisdom, decided it was best not to do anything about the Internet, but let the technology grow and evolve. They feared that taking early decisions on how the Internet should be run on e-commerce might stifle the development of the technology. And in the very same year, the International Telecommunication Union had a plenipotentiary meeting in Minneapolis, and that meeting decided to hold a summit, World Summit on the Information Society. And that brings us to the debate we had for the past 10 years. This year, 10 years ago, we were in this very building. Many of us in this room were participating in the first PrepCom for this World Summit on the Information Society. It was a long and protracted affair. There was a first summit in Geneva, adopted a declaration of principles, which had some basic principles on Internet governance, and which introduced the notion of all stakeholders should be involved in how the Internet is being run. Also, as principles, it introduced that it should be done in a transparent, inclusive, and transparent manner. Between the two summits, there was a working group on Internet governance that delved a little bit deeper with these issues, and the findings of this working group, and looking around on this panel, two of the members are on this panel, Raúl, Echeberría, and Avri, Doria were in this working group. And the second phase of the summit more or less endorsed the findings of this working group and validated the Internet model of bottom-up multi-stakeholder cooperation. There was, in addition, a decision to create a platform for dialogue, the Internet Governance Forum, and there was a little bit of a yes, but, yes, the current system works well, but we need to do more, and we need to start the process towards enhanced cooperation. Now the Internet Governance Forum has taken off, and the discussion on enhanced cooperation is still going around in circles, as there are different interpretations by different stakeholders of what it means. The next session on enhanced cooperation will take place on 18th of May, also in Geneva, in the framework of the Commission of Science and Technology for Development. But let me now turn to our panelists. It is our intention to make the session as interactive as possible, to ask individual questions to panelists and ask other panelists to comment. But after the first round, we would like audience participation and also remote participation. Raquel Gatto and Nicolas, please maybe raise your hand so the people in the room see who you are. They monitor what's happening in the blogosphere and they will bring in remote participants. But let me first turn to Raúl Echeberría, who happens to be the chairman of the ISOC Board of Trustees, and he's chairman of LACNIC, the Regional Internet Registry for Latin America. He played a very influential role during WSIS, but not in his capacity as chairman of LACNIC, but as a member of his country's delegation. Raúl, where are we now since 2005?
I will do my best. Thank you, Markus. I think that you mentioned a few minutes ago that this is the same venue in which the first PrepCon was held in 2002, and I think that this is a very symbolic thing because it's a good reference for evaluating what has happened in the last 10 years regarding internet governance. Some people sometimes think that the internet governance mechanisms are static because we have not created new intergovernmental organizations to control the internet governance arrangements, but we have experienced a lot of changes. So if we remember those of us that were here in 2002, the internet technical community and civil society and private sector were not allowed to participate in the discussions, and so we had to remain outside of the rooms with where the discussions were held behind closed doors. And now the reality is absolutely different. We have IGF, so that is a very participative and open space for dialogue among all stakeholders. We have built IGFs at the regional level. Organizations like LACNIC has opened the participation to all the stakeholders, and we are proactively engaging governments, private sector, civil society in the participation in the life of the organization. So I think that's really the changes since 2002 and now has been huge. This is what I think it is enhanced cooperation. When we talk about enhanced cooperation, I think that it's not a magic concept. This is what we do every day. Every day we are working in enhancing the cooperation among different stakeholders, and I think that we have succeeded in that endeavor. I'm very happy to see that the internet governance today is much more participative and open to everybody than 10 years ago. The organizations that are
examples, IGF and a couple other places where there is a certain amount of multi-stakeholder. There is a certain amount at ICANN. We have organizations like the IETF where there's been a multi-stakeholder model since way before anybody had the words. But then if you look around at the other institutions, there's still a long way to go. Earlier in one of the speeches, it was talked about the internet being an adolescent. In terms of multi-stakeholder model, I think we're quite at the toddler stage. We're basically starting to find our feet, but haven't quite found them yet. With every new organization or grouping that comes along, the fight has to happen again. We have to try and get civil society and the private sector included. Sometimes some come in before civil society does. We have to find ways to actually enable the civil society participation, because even sometimes when the door is opened, the civil society can't actually get there. Now, remote moderation has helped, and so it's an optimistic view of the multi-stakeholder model and multi-stakeholder governance, but I think it's a little too early to sort of say, and it has succeeded. We can look at major organizations that essentially have no multi-stakeholder governance in them yet. And even when we're in organizations like the IGF, which are firmly multi-stakeholder, some are still more equal than others. And so I think it's wonderful to be here. It's wonderful to be on a panel on how far we've come, but I think we have so much further to go yet. Thanks.
Thank you for that. Lesley?
Yes, thank you, Markus, and good morning, everyone. I was reminded in your introduction about a story in Nominet's history. So we run the .uk registry, and legend has it that when Nominet was created, the founders went to the UK government and said, hey, we're going to do this domain name system thing, and, do you want to be involved? And they had done a futurologist's report several months before that didn't mention the domain name system or the internet for that matter. So they decided that, no, we're not actually interested. Just go away and do whatever it is you're going to be doing, because we don't really understand it for that matter, and it wasn't in the report, so it's not of interest to us. In those days, multi-stakeholder, therefore, meant a small number of internet service providers who were involved in the UK industry. And look how much has changed since then. But I'm slightly to the right, so there's some logic to this seating, perhaps, Avri. I'm more of a, multi-stakeholder, maybe as a vision, maybe as some sort of thing far away that we maybe someday will get to. But actually, it's not doing that badly. Look how far the internet has gone with this multi-stakeholder model. It's not perfect, but actually we could celebrate it a bit more, because it's one of the cornerstones of the success of the internet so far.
Thank you for that, and we should not underestimate the reach of the Tunis decision to validate, as heads of state and government, a multi-stakeholder model which is contrary to the traditional model of international cooperation. And obviously we also have to remind ourselves that the organizations were set up for member states, and it can be just institutionally very difficult to adapt the rules, to change the rules. One of these conundrums is a little bit with the IGF, which was clearly set up as a platform for multi-stakeholder dialogue. But it is not the UN organization, because the UN is for member states. So it was given to the Secretary General to convene. This is sort of one of the little tricks that you can actually work to further the system. But I wonder whether we could have a government view. Heather, the chairman of ICANN's Government Advisory Committee.
Thank you, Markus, and good morning to everyone. I note that the first remarks that have been made have focused on actors that are perhaps not governmental participating in organizations that are intergovernmental. But I think this is quite different from ICANN and the Governmental Advisory Committee, where you have governments that are part of the model, and where you can observe a number of changes, I think, that are positive over time with the committee. For those less familiar with the committee, there are more than 100 members or governments, and that number is growing. All regions are represented in the GAC, as we call it, and we also have intergovernmental organizations that are able to represent regional perspectives, that participate in the committee and also are able to contribute substantive expertise based on the nature and work of those organizations. So this is a committee that's growing. However, there are challenges, and I think we do need to think about those as the committee grows and needs to be able to influence the decisions that are made within the organization to an adequate degree, and you have a consensus-based approach, then it actually relates to the speed at which you can work. And it takes governments to find consensus. I mean, I think governments can find consensus on any topic, but you need sufficient time to do that. And when governments are not determining the pace of work, if the policy development process is being driven outside of the committee, then it's quite a different role, I think, that the GAC needs to undertake that you might find in other settings. So I put that out as food for thought about the GAC and what I think is a success, but one that still has certain challenges. Before I conclude, I would also talk about culture, because this is an organization where there is a high degree of contact needed between different actors, and you have different styles of communicating, different styles of working among those communities. At the same time, you can see a high degree of willingness to find ways to communicate and work together so that we can all advance our work successfully. So that's something else that I would put on the table as well, about the different cultures that are evolving and actually able to get work done. So thank you.
Thank you. I think that was an important comment, that the different cultures of different stakeholder groups, and it is a learning process, and we should not forget that this is basically an experiment in international cooperation that was never tried out before. But Ni wanted to come in earlier. Please.
I just thought on the left I'll say something constructive about governments here. I recall Africa had its first Internet Governance meeting in 1998 at Cotonou. There was one UN DESA member and there was one government. So just judging by the participation, I think we've come a very long way. And we should not underrate the effort it takes for governments to experiment with something that is not so easily understood or accepted except by practice. And so from that point of view, I think we've done very well. And governments have contributed heavily in the, you might say, the development of the African technical institutions. And we still work very closely with, the African Union, as well as the African Telecom Union. So from that perspective, I think governments are looking very closely, and in some cases are even adopting the multi-stakeholder model within their industry forums in country, which I think is the right place for it. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there other comments on these very broad questions from panelists? Not everybody needs to comment on every question. We can. Can I ask then a question to the two persons on the very right, which are from developing regions? Carlos from Costa Rica. We were all at the ICANN meeting in San Jose. Well, not all, but many of us were there, and we admired the speech by your president, which we thought was a very enlightened speech for a head of state on the internet. Maybe you can explain us a little bit on how you work towards having such an enlightened policy in your country, or whatever you'd like to comment.
Well, I would say she focused on some issues that are important to the users. I mean, I think it's very daring for somebody to come up and say, okay, internet should be free and open, but we have to protect children. She is engaged in the ITU movement to protect the children online. And if you step back and say, oh, well, that's a limitation of freedom of access, yes, it is one. And I think this is an area where the multi-stakeholder model could work very well to translate the issues for the users into government policy. That's one part where I trust the multi-stakeholder model to help us a lot, because we are in a very democratic country. Everybody talks, but that doesn't mean the government listens. On the other hand, this morning we had a very clear distinction by Leonard Kleinrock at the end that we know a lot about the infrastructure, but we are surprised every day by the business models. We don't know what business model we will have on the internet tomorrow or the day after, and we expect every time Facebook comes with a new announcement about their privacy policies, that's where the policy is happening, in the heads of the people of Facebook. And personally, I have my serious doubts that the multi-stakeholder model can replace corporate governance as such for private operators. I think we cannot assume that it will replace outside directors for private corporations. I cannot assume it can replace auditors for private corporations, and we cannot assume that all private corporations have the same interest in the internet. That we cannot assume they are an homogeneous group. So I like very much this differentiation this morning. What are we talking about? Are we talking about the users? Are we talking about the infrastructure that developed so well until the multi-stakeholder model? Or are we talking about some very specific interest about very, very fast evolving business models?
Thank you for that. It's always good to ask ourselves, what are we talking about? I think, well, at least in my interpretation, when you talk about the multi-stakeholder model, we talk about policy development model, and also, of course, standards development model at the technical level. And I think Avri made the point, the IETF was multi-stakeholder before people used the term multi-stakeholder, where people go and participate in the standards developing processes. But next to Carlos is Virat from a very big country, and he represents a big company. And how do you see it? And how is India? I do remember we had the IGF in Hyderabad, and the Indian government was very, very positive and encouraging towards the multi-stakeholder model and the need for cooperation with business, academia, and civil society. Has it evolved since Hyderabad?
Yeah, well, as a democracy, the world's largest functioning democracy, it would be expected of us to be welcoming a multi-stakeholder engagement. But if you had to look at the numbers of the unconnected, the 4.5 billion, of which I think approximately 2.5, half of that would be between India, China, Pakistan, Nepal, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, those countries would represent roughly 2.5 billion of the unconnected. The manner in which multi-stakeholder groups engage with the government in these countries is very different. There's democracy, and there is sort of heavy government hand in some countries, and army in and out of offices in some, and stuff like that. So it's not it's not a homogeneous model. My take on this, and I would submit to the group, would be that I think those who have received access to the internet so far sort of roughly represent a homogeneous, more or less a homogeneous sort of set of characteristics around the world, even in the countries that have received it. At the next level, I think there is a huge difference on how this engagement will occur, and I think to a very large extent, specific issues will have to be dealt with. The broad principles notwithstanding, openness, transparency, and all of that stuff, I think the challenge of getting this across to the next level is much higher. So just sort of to summarize, I think the multi-stakeholder has got us to this stage in a reasonably effective manner. But I would submit, and I guess we can discuss this later, the role of governments to get this to the next stage must not be underestimated. I think it is a massive burden on the governments to get this going. by way of investment, infrastructure, access policies, regulations, laws, all of the stuff that will now start coming to pay. I'll just sort of end by saying, I know that we've talked about the Arab Spring a lot this morning. It's not as if all the governments in the world are celebrating that, sort of waiting for that to happen again. So what seems like a big opportunity to civil groups, and rightly so, it's not something that governments are comfortable with. So I think in the last few years, or at least the last year or so, things have happened around the internet which need sort of rebuilding of confidence in the government to start putting their force behind this. We can tell you from India, for example, the Right to Information Act, which is a big legislation which opens up transparency and access to government files and documents, has been a difficult challenge for the government to deal with because it's bringing in the level of transparency that they're not used to, which is the same thing with the internet. So I suppose we just need to be very careful about how to take this to the next level. We can talk about that when we discuss it.
Thank you. And Jianping Wu, you come from a country with the biggest number of internet users. What is the balance between multi-stakeholder cooperation and other models in China? Please.
Thank you, Max. Good morning, everybody. Yeah, I'm Professor at Tsinghua University, China, but also Vice President of China Internet Society of China, ISC. So this is a very good topic for us. So far, the end of the last year, the internet customers in China reach more than 500 million already, 500 million. So governance still is a very important issue in China, internally, but also internationally. So in China, internally, we probably get the consensus for the governors. In China, there are two government apartments involve the internet issues. One is information industry, Department of Information Industry. Second is the Internet Information Officer. So one involves the internet industry, like a carrier, like vendors, something, applications, ICP. Another Internet Information Officer, they involve the content, ICP, content. So different departments, they have different thinking sometimes, still need a coordinator. So we have another two important body. One is Internet Society of China. This is Internet Industry Organization in China. This organization established 12 years ago. So in the beginning, the 70 sponsors come from the carrier, ICP, ISP, ICP, vendors, some academic university institutions, and so many, total is 70. So they want to come together to discuss the internet issue. So far, the 400 members already. So mission of the ISC is to make the bridge between the different internet holders. Also want to make a bridge with government and keep the dialogues with government department sometimes. So another body, important body is LACNIC. So LACNIC is a very earlier body in China related to the internet, the operations. So normally it's four different opinions sometimes. So we work together right now. So we believe that in China side, people can make a consensus. So as multi-stakeholder is a good model for internet governance. So we're very happy to say the outside of China international is also. So we get, I'm not sure it's maybe most consensus for the multi-stakeholders. So this is very, very good for us. So I want to focus the Internet Industry Association. I believe they may play important role in the multi-stakeholders in China, particularly. So we want to sharing the experience. We set up this organization for many years. We have the 400 members. So we have the regular meeting every year, several. So we have the more than 12 committees to involve a different issue for the internet issues. So I believe the ISA is play important role in the internet governance in the China already. So this is important for us. Sometimes the companies, they have so many fighting each other sometimes. So if you ask a government to resolve the issues, it's very complicated. So it asks us to send some people to dialogue between, ask people come together to dialogue the issue. Finally, so most of the issue can have good results. So finally, the people keep the itself. So I think it's a very good model. I want to, if everybody is interesting, I want to introduce so many cases for this issue. So I think it's very important. I also suggest for the international governors, global internet governors, we also suggest the internet industry.
Sorry to interrupt you, but can we hold that back for a later?
Yes.
We look to the future then in a second segment.
Okay, that's stopped.
Okay, thank you very much. Would any of the panelists have comments, questions to what you've heard so far before we open up the discussion to the floor? Lesley, please.
Yeah, just quickly, several people have referred to multi-stakeholderism as an experiment. And I would query, are we at an experimental stage still, or is this just how we are and it's a model that's evolving as the internet evolves? Because by referring to an experiment, that sounds to me a bit like we're either going to pass the assessment grade or we're going to have some alternative experiment that will produce a different outcome. And very much, I think, particularly hearing the fantastic work in China, it sounds as though the model is progressing well there, as it is in many other places. So maybe we're beyond experimental stage. We're into evolution and making this thing better.
Good point. Mea culpa, I used the word experiment, but I was actually referring to it was an experiment when it was started, and we're learning on how to evolve it. You know, you could not have expected it to be perfect, but it is.
So did we pass the experiment?
Well, the internet works. I think that's the basic test. I think, nobody can say the internet doesn't work. And so presumably the governance structures we have set up seem to be working as well. But you would like to comment, Virat?
Yeah, I just wanted to do a contrast on the multi-stakeholder models vis-a-vis in India, for example, where we have approximately 750 million mobile phones. So we add about 8 to 10 million. We've slowed down mobile phones a month now. Used to be 20 million till December 2010. And I can tell you from my experience of being with the industry for about 18 years that we did not need multi-stakeholder discussions to the extent that we need in internet for the telecom business. Actually, the telecom business worked really well. With the government and operators having a discussion, people would produce their own content, which was, voice produced, and it would run fairly well. On the internet side, of course, we just can't make it work unless we get everybody in the room. And at FICCI, which is the leading industry association, we've just launched a whole initiative to get everyone that needs to work with this elephant to make it work. The local content providers, the language providers, the advertising team, the governments. In fact, it's the first time we have government serving on a committee, because we just know for a fact that this one is not going to work. And on telecom, I can tell you where we've had tremendous success. We never even thought or needed this kind of an engagement. It's just taken off on its own.
Thank you, and that's another important comment, actually, that multi-stakeholder cooperation includes governments. It's not against governments, and it's important that governments participate in this. But Raúl, you wanted to comment?
Yes, in the same line that other speakers, I think that really we have made important progresses in the dialogue between different stakeholders. In Latin America, there are some formal mechanisms for participation that are working very well, and in fact, internet organizations and private sector is participating also in classic intergovernmental environments, and so we are well received there. And so I think that we have a very constructive relationship, and we have progressed the multi-stakeholder model also to other areas of information society debate. And so it is working very well. We have also dialogue led by ECLAC, the Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean, that lead all the dialogue, the regional dialogue on information society. We have discovered that there is not controversy at this moment, or there have not been controversy in the last few years about IP addresses management, CCTLD management, even in other more political issues like access or interconnection. It is working well. I think that the challenge of this multi-stakeholder model, both the formal structures and also the informal dialogue that exists among all stakeholders, is when issues are becoming more sensitive. So when we start to discuss about network neutrality or intellectual property rights, so security. So this is, I think, this is the challenge. So what really we have to work very much in the near future is to see if this open dialogue will remain productive and useful when we enter in the discussion in those more controversial issues.
Yeah, I see. Avri has a comment, please.
Thank you. I'd actually like to speak in favor of viewing us as still being involved in an experiment. I tend to see the multi-stakeholder model and all of the variety of implementations and instantiations of it as somewhat of a very noble experiment that we're in terms of furthering the notions of democracy, going to a participatory democracy. I think we're still very much learning how it is it works, in what context it works. I think one of the things that came out in some of the discussions here is also somewhat notion of the multi-stakeholder model sort of being recursive and existing at many levels. We talk about a global multi-stakeholder and global organizations, but then we also talk about within the various groupings, within the countries, within industries perhaps, also looking at a multi-stakeholder model. So I don't want to say that it's something that'll disappear on us. I certainly agree it's an emerging thing, it's an evolving thing, but I think we're still actively and need to still actively experiment with it. How do we make it work better? How do we include everyone as a peer? How do we actually achieve transparency and get something done? And I think there's a lot of experimenting left to do, though I don't think that there is such a model as an experiment. It's just, how do we do it?
Thank you. I think it's a differentiation I, for one, can live with. I hope you are happy with that as well, Lesley. I mean, I think multi-stakeholder cooperation has affirmed itself as a valid way of running the internet, and we as Internet Society, we really defend that. It's a collaborative, bottom-up way of policy development, which is adapted to the underlying technology, which is also distributed and
Absolutely. I mean, in the title for this session, there was the "Are we at the state of the art?" kind of phraseology, and I was thinking, gosh, no, we're not at the state of the art at all. In fact, we're a long way from it. But I think some of the people who have proposals as to how this model can be improved aren't talking about having a different experiment. We're talking about making things better, making things more inclusive, more open and more transparent. And we're also facing up to the difficulties that Raúl was referring to. Some of the easy policy issues were decided years ago. We're now at some of the very difficult policy issues in a number of cases that will really test how effective that model can be going forward.
And also, the internet has gained in importance since. I remember in WSIS when we celebrated the first billion online, and now we have 2 billion online. And there were applications in the early stages of Facebook, YouTube, and whatever, and these are now the bread and butter of the internet. But I wonder whether we can open the discussion a bit here, comments and questions from the floor. But first, maybe let's go to the remote participants. Raquel and Nicola, do you have any? Nothing? Yes? Nothing? Nada?
So far, no. I think they're still waiting for the roundtable. And we have now 130 viewers, individual remote participants, and 3 hubs connected, Lebanon, Cameroon, and SF Bay, San Francisco Bay.
Great. Oh. They're up early, San Francisco, yeah. 9 hours time difference. Well, welcome to all remote participants, and don't feel shy. Jump in. Questions from the floor. Stefano, please.
Thank you, Chair. So the question you asked to the panel is, let's say, how, since 2005, these discussions about in the phase where we are, that is the phase of implementing the multi-stakeholder model and then evaluate how this is running or not. So I'm the chair of the Italian chapter of the Internet Society, and next Thursday in Turin, not far from here, we will organize a meeting with the title, Defending the Internet. So I'm trying to explain what I mean by that. Actually, this, the multi-stakeholderism is a question of putting together the users, the civil society, the private sector, and the governments. And personally, I have an experience being the expert of my government in the GAC of ICANN and in the high-level group on internet governance of the European Commission. And I find a number of difficulties. One is that traditionally, internet, when was mainly a communication infrastructure, was something dealt by the ministries of communications. While since 2005, after the World Summit, many governments started to set up ministries in charge of the information society. And then we have that the two kind of ministries exchange views, collaborate, and say the same story in different environments. For example, ITU is more connected to the communication ministries, and then other people going to IGFs is more concerning the information society. So this is a difficulty by the government. Then there is, of course, from the private sector, they wish the possibility of having an open market, of developing the economy and things like that. And maybe the final users want to have an internet completely free with no regulations and so on. So we are experiencing the evaluation of the of this model that is actually exercised by ICANN very well, and also the Internet Society is defending this model. And then in the end we have this question about the different opinions of what Professor Kleinrock called the Internet rich and the Internet poor. So the real point is that let's say, developing countries or technologically emerging countries sometimes have different ideas about the equilibrium between the three components. I mean, government, private sector, users. And this is something that, in the end, to conclude, needs from our side, those that are either old guys or experts in the Internet model, to have a lot of patience, because we have to discuss, we have to try to harmonize the different opinions also of developing countries and more rich countries. Thank you.
Thank you. I will gather a few questions from the floor before asking our panelists to comment. Yes, Eric, yes, please.
Thank you. I will try to move from the multi-stakeholder to the multilinguals, so I will speak in Spanish. Please put the headphone. Creo que seré el primero que hablar en otro idioma que no sea inglés, y eso también es parte de lo importante de la inclusión, y que ya se mencionaba hace un ratito de que no todo el mundo habla inglés en el Internet. El comentario específico es que mientras que los países, por un lado, y ciertas oficinas tratan de hablar sobre multi-stakeholder y se acercan a unas alianzas público-privadas, incluyendo sociedad civil, otras oficinas de los mismos gobiernos trabajan de una manera aislada y trabajan en contrasentido, tratando de avanzar también para mejorar sus relaciones con otros. En concreto, mientras ciertas oficinas creen en un Internet abierto y necesario de integrar, otras oficinas colocan trabas y barreras para dicho Internet. En América Latina, muchos países están desarrollando tratados de libre comercio con otros países. Estos incluyen cláusulas del tema de propiedad intelectual, tema de responsabilidad de proveedores de servicio de Internet, temas relacionados a telecomunicaciones, que no necesariamente están pensados en un modelo multi-stakeholder. Si esto es lo que está ocurriendo a nivel de los encargados de comercio, ¿por qué los que ven sociedad de la información tienen una visión diferente y no pueden acoplarse a estas negociaciones de sus propios países? Lo mismo no solamente ocurre con los gobiernos, sino también ocurre desde el lado de sociedad civil, que en muchos de los casos solamente estamos los involucrados activistas en temas de Internet y no necesariamente los actores de derechos humanos, que también deberían estar relevantes e involucrados en estos temas de multi-stakeholder. Mi pregunta es, ¿cómo vivimos tan divididos o bipolares dentro de nuestras propias organizaciones y países?
Thank you. Bill, you asked for the floor, and there are others.
Thank you, Markus. I'm Bill Drake from the University of Zurich. I guess I'm positioned to the left of Avri, so I will go a little bit further in her direction of saying that we all love the soup, but there are flies in it. There are some issues that I think we have to confront, and I'd just like to raise two. First of all, last time I remember being in this room, I think it was about 2 years ago, when we were having a discussion around improvements to the Internet Governance Forum. And we had a situation where all of the Internet governance regulars were all sitting here patting each other on the back about the glories of the multi-stakeholder system. And we had a group of representatives from the G77 governments who were all sitting in the back of the room refusing to speak. And then afterwards, there was a dialogue that occurred around that I thought was quite illustrative, and that's played out in other environments. One wonders how broad and how deep the commitment to multi-stakeholderism really is beyond the nexus of people that are most heavily involved in the ICANN and the IGF, and how do we grow the level of involvement there and commitment? That's a first challenge. A second challenge, I think, which is related, is that, and this is perhaps a little bit more sensitive, but I don't shy away from such things. Many of the governments that celebrate multi-stakeholderism repeatedly in various forums, when floating around, in particular in the industrialized world, in fact don't seem terribly interested in pushing multi-stakeholderism into new spaces. So, for example, we're across the street from an intergovernmental body, which is in the process of negotiating an international binding treaty, which could impact the internet, and yet within that body, the governments from the Western industrialized world that say that they love multi-stakeholders have not supported making that body more multi-stakeholder and allowing civil society in particular to get involved. And I think the same thing could be pointed to in a number of other settings. So there is a question then about how deep the commitment is. Is it limited just to the spaces that we already are practicing it in? And then the last point I would make is I think it's also worth noting that while it's true that in a real peer-to-peer multi-stakeholder kind of setting like ICANN or IGF, anybody can show up and you can have a general sitting next to a hacker with a nose ring and so on, and that's great. At the same time, there are nevertheless significant differences in power and influence among the players. There are big companies with a lot of money at stake, there are governments with a lot of influence, and then there's civil society people trying to raise their points alongside them, and business people and so on. And undoubtedly, the fact that you can have a open participatory dialogue doesn't negate the realities of the material world where power is distributed asymmetrically and outcomes are shaped by influence. So I think we need to recognize that there are some limitations to the current practice of multilateralism, or to multi-stakeholderism, and to ask ourselves, what can we do to try, if we really believe that this is an architecture worth building on and taking forward, how do we expand its scope? How do we deepen the level of commitment among all players? And how do we try to ensure that the asymmetries that exist in the broader world don't negate the formal structures that allow that openness?
Thank you. Question for the last round of discussion there. I had noted Bertrand, Aisha, and
another person there.
that person I don't recognize, but you will introduce yourself. And right at the back, is that Sebastian, I think, and Fuad, I think. Okay, let's stop it at that then. Okay, Bertrand first, but try and be short and concise, always.
Why do you say that for me? Okay, my name is Bertrand Lachapelle. I am with the International Diplomatic Academy and on the ICANN board. Just want to highlight something that Professor Wu said, the very important distinction that when we talk about internet governance, we're talking about two things that are different and relate to the different layers. There's governance of the internet as an infrastructure and governance on the internet, i.e. the usage and the activities that people do. And in that respect, I would argue, to go in the direction that Lesley has explored, that as far as governance of the internet is concerned, the multi-stakeholder model was there from the onset, has been proven as working, has been functioning so far relatively okay. The challenge we have is defining the modalities for governance on the internet. And the challenge we have is that we do not have the tools. There has been no specific new spaces created apart from the IGF, which is the first effort. And the challenge is not to come back to the traditional tools, but to move forward. And I would summarize this by a formula that says, basically, we need more governance mechanisms, because if we don't, we will have less internet, because the only instrument that will be available is the proliferation of national legislations that will partition the internet again into geographic territories. It is our common objective to design the new instruments for governance on the internet, rather than focusing on the part that is the infrastructure, which, by the way, is functioning well. Thank you.
Thank you. And the gentleman, the row in front of Petra, please, and introduce yourself.
Thank you very much. My name is Mohamed Ibrahim. I'm from Somalia. When a few years ago I started going to the ICANN meetings and the Internet Governance forums, there used to be a word. It was a stakeholder. I was told, you're a stakeholder, you have a say in this, and I was enjoying it. And then I was told later on, oh, you're now part of the multi-stakeholder. So it's getting better. Then recently I'm hearing multi-stakeholderism. I say, oh, okay. All of this is, to me, Orwellian language. Really, the bottom line is I'm interested in the governance of internet. Why? Because I'm Somalia and I'm interested in getting my people exposed to the rest of the world and expression of ideas and sharing of knowledge and so on. But as the word gets longer and longer, in fact, I think the significance is getting less and less. So the idea, to me, what I'm interested is, yes, I'm a stakeholder, I want to have a say, but how do I do it? My voice is getting less and less, my ideas are not getting any further. So ICANN came up with a new idea that helps me. They came up with IDN. So I said, well, this might be a way to get out. So what do? I will create .Swahili or .Somalia. And I will use my language, and I will say to you, thank you very much, now I can do what I want, and I will exclude you. But that's not really the intention, because the whole idea of the internet, when I came to it, was noble idea where the humanity in general, we can share the good things we do together and so on. So I guess what I'm saying is perhaps we should go back and get some clarity in this word so that we all understand, from stakeholder to multi-stakeholder to stakeholderism to stakeholderization. I don't know what's the next one. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Aisha?
Thank you. Aisha Hassan from the International Chamber of Commerce. I've really appreciated a number of the comments from the panelists and the questions that have been coming out, and I thought it might be helpful just to underscore that what we're striving for in the experiments that have been described is the multi-stakeholder approach, where all stakeholders are on an equal footing. So that's government, civil society, the internet technical community, and business. And from a business perspective, and I think from, I would assume, the stakeholders who support this approach, it isn't just about the process, it's about the reason why we think this approach is the right one. And that's because none of the issues that we're trying to tackle in the past years, today, or in the future can actually be dealt with by any stakeholder group alone. And absorbing that and thinking about that, I think, will help us as many organizations, processes, perhaps new structures or forums at the regional, local, and global level, try to best approach a dialogue among the stakeholders, keeping that in mind, that actually nobody can do this on their own. And it is the collective wisdom and experience that actually makes the multi-stakeholder approach in the internet context a success. I would also say that as we look around, there are many interpretations of what is multi-stakeholder, what is multi-stakeholderism. And one of the concerns we have is where that gets a bit defined out of what it really is meant to be. So I would just caution, as we're going into more discussions about the multi-stakeholder approach, improving it in various organizations and forums, as well as in the context of the discussion on enhanced cooperation, that we bear in mind the objective and purpose. And as our colleague from Somalia has just pointed out, and some others have posed the question in their comments, I think it's really critical to be looking at how we improve the inclusive participation of cross-stakeholder groups in these processes and forums. We hear a lot of dialogue about that. I can say from a global business perspective, there are many efforts that are being made at a local, regional, and global level to raise awareness. But I would be interested in hearing more concrete ideas today and as we go forward to understand what really can be done to improve that, and what really are the challenges that are being faced, and how can we all collectively build towards a more inclusive participation across stakeholder groups in a range of these processes and discussions. Thank you.
Thank you. I had Wolfgang and Fuad and is that Sebastian? Yes. Okay, Wolfgang has been patient. Raquel has some. Okay, let's give precedence to the remote participants, please.
Thank you. It's a question from the Isaac Lebanon chapter hub. They are asking, do we know of a successful stories where multi-stakeholder governance influenced positively government regulation and actions in semi-democratic countries? That's the question. And I would like just to highlight some of the other participants have already mentioned, but they want to know why it's not easy to participate in internet governance, and if a multi-stakeholder holder would like to be involved, which are the key issues? So it's a broad question. I just would like to highlight and make their voice heard.
Well, I think I would happily answer the first question. I think Kenya, for instance, and I'm looking up to Alice, but Kenya is a good example of a country that has made tremendous progress, and they have fully embraced the multi-stakeholder approach. And I talked to a senior official and who said it can be painful sometimes, but it helps us make the better decisions. And I think that's an excellent summary of a multi-stakeholder cooperation. But back to our discussants in the room. Wolfgang, you've been patient.
Okay. My name is Wolfgang Kleinwächter. I'm from the University of Aarhus. As Bill Drake has said, we all like the soup, but we have a different idea, how spicy the soup should be. It is good to see that in the G8 Deauville Declaration, the heads of states of the 8 leading industrial nations support the multi-stakeholder principle for internet governance. It was good to hear from our colleague from China that internet governance, multi-stakeholderism is seen as an important principle for managing the internet in China. And you have this lip service to the multi-stakeholder principle now everywhere. I think nobody talks against it. But it's different if it comes to the very concrete issues. I think we have 2 processes where this plays a role. One is the policy development process, and then comes the decision-making process. I think in the policy development process it's much more easier. So that means you just listen to everybody. Everybody has a seat on the table, and in this field, it's a growing number of groups and individuals and organizations who want to participate, and the IGF is the ideal place for it. Nobody is excluded from the IGF. But if it comes to decision making, then it gets much more complicated. The OECD was celebrated its multi-stakeholder approach by inviting civil society to create an advisory body, so the CSAC. And then they had a concrete project on the table, principles for internet policy making. And the advisory board from civil society disagreed with the draft, at least in 2 articles. And then, the problem was what to do with this disagreement. Should governments go ahead and ignore it, or, how to accommodate this disagreement? So finally, the document was adopted by the Intergovernmental Council of the OECD. And so, in these 2 very key questions, the role of intermediaries and intellectual property regulations. So we have this disagreement, and I think this would be a challenge for the future, to work on procedures, how you deal with such disagreements, that you have a certain procedure in place so that governments are facing disagreements from non-governmental stakeholders, that they understand, how to handle this. Thirdly, somebody has to make a decision, and not all stakeholders are equal. So in the definition from the WCAG, we have this formulation in their respective roles. Thirdly, the role of government is different from the role of civil society. But they have to learn to live together, and this has to be also fixed in a certain flexible way in procedures which are not yet on the table. Thank you.
And to all those in this room, I do remember the discussion on procedures can be extremely painful. Remember PrepCom 1 10 years ago. We spent 2 weeks discussing nothing but procedures, and civil society had to knock on the door to be heard. Sebastian, right at the end, back of the room.
Merci. Je vais m'exprimer en français, si vous m'autorisez. Eric a été plus rapide que moi pour parler dans une langue différente que l'anglais dans cette enceinte. Bravo, Eric. Je suis donc Sébastien Bachelet, président d'honneur du chapitre français de l'Internet Society et membre du board de l'ICANN. Dans les discussions qui ont eu lieu fort intéressantes, il y a un point qui me semble important dans l'histoire de la gouvernance d'Internet, ou dans l'histoire de la gouvernance, c'est que avant le WSIS, il y a eu des sommets mondiaux sur d'autres sujets que la société de l'information et où les citoyens, les utilisateurs, la société civile étaient laissés en dehors de la salle, et ce qui donnait en général plutôt des batailles rangées que des batailles d'idées, plutôt une mini-guerre qu'une paix, qu'elle soit armée ou non, autour d'une table. Et je pense que l'arrivée de la participation de ces citoyens, de ces utilisateurs et de la société civile dans le cadre de la gouvernance de l'Internet a évité que nous soyons, nous utilisateurs, en dehors de la salle, en train de nous battre avec les forces de police. Et je pense que c'est une progression extraordinaire et qui devrait être appliquée. C'est une des raisons pour lesquelles je pense qu'elle devrait être appliquée dans d'autres champs que celui de l'Internet, comme on dit des précédents participants. Le dernier élément que je voulais soulever, c'était la participation de tous est importante, mais il faut de plus en plus essayer de passer de « je participe pour dire ce que j'ai à dire » à « je participe pour dialoguer avec les autres ». Et je pense qu'on est dans cette phase où c'est le passage de l'un à l'autre qui est encore un peu difficile. Et pour terminer, je ne suis pas sûr qu'il faut aller dans l'autre sens, comme un orateur l'a dit tout à l'heure, en disant « pour les télécoms, il n'y a jamais eu besoin de multistakeholder ». Peut-être que s'il y avait eu du multistakeholder dans les télécoms, on aurait des tarifs différents sur le roaming qu'il n'y a aujourd'hui, parce qu'on ne prend pas en compte les utilisateurs, les citoyens, les clients dans ce domaine-là. Merci beaucoup.
Merci, Sébastien. Fouad.
Thank you, Markus. Fouad Bajwa from the ISOC chapter, Lahore, Pakistan Information. Trust me, we all like our soup that Bill Drake mentions, and I come from a part of the world where there are a lot of spices, but no multi-stakeholderism. Together we look at the Internet public policy evolution as collaborative Internet governance today, and we need to break out of our own sole perception of the multi-stakeholder model we claim to have developed in the recent years. To a great extent, we are defining it for ourselves. And we have to advocate it beyond just what we all do. To address this, we may need to take extensive steps towards evolving multi-stakeholderism within various other sectors and environments in other settings. Achieving an equal footing and a stakeholder balance that my colleagues have earlier mentioned will continue to remain a major challenge for all of us. Will multi-stakeholder and multi-stakeholderism be confined only to a handful few in one or two settings, or will we be able to extend it beyond an open space dialogue without outcomes or in a buffer zone where the technical coordination and unilateralism are at two different ends? Where do we go from here, and where do we see multi-stakeholderism within the next 1 year? Thank you.
Thank you. I have, I think, two more speakers in the room that put up their hand, and then the remote participants, and then I would like to take the discussion back to the panel. Yes, please. Peter, I think.
My name is Peter Bruck. I'm the chairman of the World Summit Award. And I want to come back to what Bertrand was very succinctly putting to us, which is there a difference, or do we make a difference in terms of governance of the Internet to governance on the Internet? The World Summit Award started as a follow-on activity to the WSIS process 2003 and 2005, and the Internet Society has been very much involved in this. And I recall a discussion which I had with Amadou Touré when he became Secretary General of the ITU regarding ITU. And he said, you are, with the World Summit Award, looking at the uses of the Internet, and you are not in the telecom realm. So what he said is, you are media, and you are not engineering. And I think this is something very important to say. There's a freedom of the pipe, which is actually, if you want to reduce it, it's the freedom of engineers, where people are building infrastructure. But when you get into governance issues regarding the freedom of citizens, then you are entering a completely different kind of domain. And so what Bertrand was saying is governance for on the Internet, what's happening on the Internet, is very much related to the questions of freedom of expression, freedom of opinion, of freedom of movement, and freedom of activism. And I think that it's very important that we discuss this here very clearly in terms of the pros and cons. There's a lot to be gained, but there are also dangers ahead if one moves from free governance of the Internet to governance on the Internet. In terms of what we have experienced with the World Summit Award, it is very clearly that people are willing to talk about e-content and applications when it's coming to innovation, but very much less when it comes to depth of content, creation of applications which are changing actually things in the world. So from my point of view, the question to this meeting and also to ISOC is, when you move, do we want to move, and how far do we want to move in terms of the issues on governance on the Internet, and do we not enter into a different kind of space of power relations where we are having much less control and much less expertise, and what is actually a good way of doing this step by step. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And the gentleman there, yes, please.
Okay, my name is John Flodin from Sweden. My question is for a direct proof of concept for the multi-stakeholder model. As we know, the International Telecoms Regulations from 1988 is now about to be updated with intergovernmental talks until December in Dubai. As our role with association to the ITU, we can see that there are text proposals from certain countries that directly affects the Internet. Wouldn't it be both appropriate and logical that these intergovernmental talks would be open and inclusive as per the multi-stakeholder model for the Internet, at least for those text proposals that directly will affect the Internet in the future? Thank you.
Thank you. The remote question, Raquel?
It's from Henriette from APC, and she asks, the panel has focused on participation in Internet governance. What about accountability and recourse? Who can a user hold accountable if, for example, they don't have affordable access or freedom of expression?
Thank you. Yeah, we had a rich discussion and not that much time left. I'm not sure, I don't think we can actually answer all these questions or react to all the comments.
Many of them are related.
Many of them are indeed related. But basically, I would like also a little bit look forward, how to take it from here, Internet governance, multi-stakeholder approach. Well, our Chinese friends started already with making proposals, so why don't we take it from there and you make what you were going to say when I rudely interrupted you.
Okay, I just want to say for the multi-stakeholder model, Internet Industry Association may play an important role in the future. Because from China's situation, if something happen in the internet, government ask ISA first. They ask us to give some suggestion, probably to do something, give some suggestion. I think we have the fully dialogue with the government. So not just the association, but also we have the industry partners, so many members, we to work together. I believe this is good, but not just internally to do something, also to outside. For example, we have the working group, the copyright, the working group committee. We also involve the internals fighting. Sometimes if outside they have something happen related to China, you can ask us. We can coordinate as our member. So I think it's a very good model. I suggest if we have something happen outside international, we have to discuss. So the not good things is Internet Society of China is still not the member of the ISOC right now. This is a big problem for some reason. So I hope we hope we can participate this organization. This is my hope. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, listening to the various comments, they are clearly, and also the comment related to the WICID conference, we have on the one hand traditional organizations, traditional procedures in place, and they increasingly touch on issues related to the internet. We discussed that at length in the working group on internet governance. There are, whether we want to call it a governance of or governance on, but what the working group proposed was a very broad-ranging definition of internet governance that touched on the infrastructure of the internet, but also of the use of the internet and on the abuse of the internet. And for most of these questions related to intellectual property, for instance, to trade, there are organizations in place, they have their established procedures, but they don't take into account what has happened in 2005 in WSIS when governments agreed that any issue dealing with internet governance should be dealt with in cooperation with all stakeholders. It's a slight dichotomy we have to live with, but it was a summit. It's not a binding result. It's a declaration of principles. It's a plan of action. It's the Tunis agenda. And these are basically noble principles, but they don't automatically change the world as it is, which does not mean we should not work towards changing the world as it is and calling for more openness, more open procedures, more involvement of all stakeholders in existing processes. And this is what happened earlier this year in the US with SOPA and PIPA and broader with ACTA, where internet users stood up and started to protest. And this is, internet users basically don't want governments to decide anything that affects the internet without their having their say. And I think this was a very encouraging movement, and governments have started listening. So this is basically the question, how do we want to move on? I remember, Lesley, I'm turning to you. I was in a meeting in London where you coined the phrase Internet Governance 2.0. I think that would be maybe a good start to take us further.
That was my cunning plan for world domination that you've just revealed to everybody. Yes, I guess where, for me, that phrase came from is about this experimentation thing that I touched on earlier. That this is the model, but as the internet has grown and as we have worked together increasingly, we need to get on to newer versions and upgrades and so on. So maybe to respond to Eric's point and Bill and several others, for me, the next 2.0 of Internet governance is really about getting people to this discussion, and also old-timers, I think, being very welcoming to new people in these discussions too, because there's going to be many more participants who really, we better not speak in acronyms too. But I think key in Model 2.0 for me is about sharing information, sharing new perspectives, and people listening to those perspectives, and as a result, really developing better understanding in order to inform policy. So sometimes the arguments about procedures, etc., are really not a positive contribution to that model. And I think really we need to demonstrate the value of this model further and better than we do. So I like the ISOC Lebanon idea about case studies that actually really demonstrate the value of being here, the value of listening and developing understanding, so as to get better policy, whether it be better national policy or global policy. That would be Internet 2.0 for me.
Thank you for that. Virat, please.
Specifically to the question on how we get this multi-stakeholder group going in India, the approach that we, as I said, we've not. I know the French-speaking gentleman spoke about that in telecom the roaming rates are high, but I would argue that the approach that we had has actually delivered outstandingly well for Indian citizens, where access is concerned, lowest tariffs in the world in mobile telephony. But clearly we've not had nearly that success in internet. And so one of the routes that we are using, just to specifically put a plan on the desk here, is to let the industry association lead this discussion with the multi-stakeholders to begin with, because they seem to have a higher level of credibility with civil society, governments who we work naturally with, our members, which are ISPs and mobile operators. In India, telecom mobile operators will have a significant role in delivering broadband wireless. It's not going to get delivered the way it got delivered in the West with sort of fixed line, and so they're a big part of this discussion. As you know, we have a very vibrant content industry. IT piece is very strong. So we're beginning at the industry association and bringing the groups together. I've got to tell you, in the first meeting that we called the industry association, my colleague is here somewhere, we didn't even have addresses, emails of people to invite to the meeting, because that's not your normal mandate. So we're actually jumping into new waters and trying to get civil society in. And we were quite pleased to see that they were trusting of us and they were willing to come on the desk and have this discussion. And so that's the model that we are building. And the plan for the year this year is also to sign an MOU actually with ISOC. We end this panel and get out to start discussing the MOU with FICCI, hopefully to get more international engagement on international practices. The thing that's working with the government, or we hope will work with the government in India, is that the younger ministers are less worried about what internet can do, or in fact they have incentives in having it grow because they're using it for getting re-elected, creating jobs, as somebody spoke this morning about more jobs being created. So we're actually hoping to create incentives for politicians, even if they're narrow incentives, for them to get into the game and start having this discussion in good faith. Industry, for example, business case doesn't work in India. It works perfectly well in telecom, not in internet. So they need to get in front of the government. The laws need to be discussed. Otherwise, we're a terrorist-prone country. We've had various issues in cross-border calls and internet access. So the laws and the secrecy and the privacy issues have to be discussed. I'm sure you're aware of Shashi Tharoor, one of the sort of UN, she ran for the UN Secretary General. He's a big sort of votary of social media. Internet has over 1 million followers on Twitters. And he's sort of a big, so we're bringing mnemonics out there, symbolic people who are using it successfully, internationally successful. So that's the kind of environment we're trying to create. It's a tough one. Let me also tell you the decision making is far more difficult when you have so many voices But that we are used to as a democracy, as a very noisy democracy. I have to end by saying that the recent year has been more difficult. There have been more exposés thanks to internet. The Arab Spring, I can tell you, has had the government worried in parts, not in India so much, but I think the overall influence of where this is going, what does it mean? But we are hoping to use the industry forum to bring everybody together and slowly move it. And to the point that how deep is the commitment, I can tell you that it's not as deep as it should be, but we are hoping that over the next 2 years, there'll be real discussion and engagement on some of these substantive issues, because without a truly multi-stakeholder discussion, at least where the 1.2 billion in India are concerned, there is no way we can move this one forward even half an inch.
Carlos, please.
Yes, in terms of looking forward, I propose to benchmark it, measure it. Who participates from the users, from the companies, from the governments? How many people participate, and what do they produce? I mean, in this, I wouldn't dare to ask Markus what the participation was in the last quarterly voting in Switzerland. But this is what we need to do, and I think the ISOC chapters are best suited to start measuring, and the next time we meet, we have some benchmarking. How is it working?
Switzerland is an interesting example. We have very participatory democracy, but not everybody takes part. But they have the right to take part, and they have also the right to abstain if they're not interested in an issue. But Raúl, you wanted to come in.
Yes, thank you, Markus. I think that's the multi-stakeholder model is something that it will be very difficult to stop in the future. And I think that multi-stakeholder approaches will be adopted in many areas, just much more than just internet. And I'm seeing this is one of the questions that was raised: what is the scope of the application of multi-stakeholder model? And I think that we cannot decide what is the scope. It will be decided by the people. But I see that there are many progresses in this sense in areas that are very close of internet matters and other areas that are far away from internet issues. And it doesn't mean that there will not be obstacles in the future, and we will make progresses and we will go back many times. And of course, the current model is not a perfect model. As Avri and Bill suggested, there are forums in which some people is more equal than others, and that's true. So we have to work on that every day. Some examples that have been mentioned, like the ITU, is I think that ITU has to change, and many other intergovernmental organizations. ITU has 700 of members from private sector, and it is very few. Only LACNIC, that is a regional organization, have more than 2,500 members. So it means that many people is not able to be to give their voice to some forums. There are need to implement changes, and they will have to change. Provide new ways of hearing and giving an opportunity to these people to influence the processes. It will happen in 1 year, 2 years? I don't think so. I think that it will take more time, but I think that at some point it will happen. So I think that's in one important thing is that all the people that is involved in managing organizations or forums has to be very proactive in engaging other stakeholders. It is not enough just to provide a good model and a perfect policy development process that is open to the participation of everybody if the stakeholders don't come to participate. So we have to be very active in engaging the people and try to understand what are their expectations and how to fit their expectations and how to accommodate the process also for permitting broader participation. So summarizing, I think that multi-stakeholder model is something that came for staying and for remaining here. as we will see in the near future much more organizations and forums implementing multi-stakeholder approaches. That there is something that is very important that Ayesha mentioned, that is that I think that many people is realizing that nobody has the monopoly of the wisdom. And so the governments themselves are very open in some cases to engage people from private sector or and different sectors, civil society and some specific sectors depending on the area, in order to deal better with a broad agenda that they are facing. So governments have to participate in many forums, hundreds of forums around the world in different areas, and they need the collaboration from stakeholders that are outside of the government. And so I think this is, I'm very optimistic in the sense that the multi-stakeholder model is something that will be applied in many forums and many different areas beside those that we know today. There will be obstacles, as we have to face the obstacles and to work in order to skip them, but I think that the future is good in that sense.
Thank you very much. Raúl, governments are an important stakeholder. Heather?
Thank you. I've jotted down a few notes, I think, from the discussion, so I'll share some thoughts that occurred to me as a result of that. Regarding what approach is best suited to deal with a particular problem, it occurs to me that this is how governments pursue finding solutions, and the challenge is to balance competing interests, to ensure things like operational effectiveness, or allow for that to happen, and to have as a result the best decision possible. And so this is really how governments, I think, try to tackle the problem of choosing a particular model or approach. The question around multi-stakeholderism is really a good one, because there has to be a limit to how far you can stretch the meaning of multi-stakeholderism in different organizations without rendering the word as having little value. So what are those features that are really at the core of this concept of multi-stakeholderism? At the beginning of the discussion, I heard a greater emphasis on two divides, two tracks. So whether that's different organizations, whether it's different parts within a single government, or two philosophical approaches to looking at things. But I think where we're coming to is a recognition that while there may be a duality, that these dualities do not exist in complete isolation. I think I'm also hearing that we think that the Internet governance perspective, based on the multi-stakeholder principle, is more likely to need to influence other approaches rather than the opposite of that. And the risks are that that we're mistaken, in fact. But when all's said and done, governments are equally committed to various models. For example, they may be equally committed to ICANN and the ITU, for example. And so we need to think about that and really how that plays out in the future. But with this evolution, this ongoing evolution, and the successes we've talked about, like increasing participation from various parts of the world, an increase in terms of number, interest, capacity to participate. We've created some new challenges for ourselves, but that's okay, because in fact we can find ways to organize regionally or locally I think many of us have talked about the successes of the regional Internet governance forums. Well, why do they resonate so well? Because people think that they have greater influence or a stronger voice by being active locally and also being able to impact things at a global level. When all said and done, I think it's useful for us to keep Internet users at the center of all we do. So, thank you.
Thank you very much. Nee, would you like to say?
I'd like to make the following observations. I think the concept of experiments is not considered favorable from my region because we are trying to play catch up. So don't change the experiment, don't move the bar. The more we keep things stable, the faster we can maybe connect with the rest of the world. And so we like to take a somewhat different view of that. I like to also associate myself with the view expressed by Aisha that it's becoming difficult to expect one stakeholder group to have the expertise, the knowledge that is required to deal with such an interconnected set of issues that we are handling. And I think governments in my environment are beginning to also appreciate that and are trying to exploit the multi-stakeholder approach. Now, I think any restriction or any suggestion of an approach that takes away from the openness and free flow of knowledge and so on will be detrimental to Africa's efforts, and we will not take it too lightly. Regarding 2.0, I think we should move away a little bit from the center and let's go to the edges. I believe it is local policies, largely, that affect access, that affect the community, the building of capacity to support the access that is to come. And so finding out the right policies that increase investment, that grow the community and make the community strong is really where we ought to be going. And we should be looking for more concrete things. I don't think the abstract things helps with people who are trying to play catch up. So we should be looking for things like, how do I put an exchange point and do things? Or how do I engage the rest of the development community to help with open government data so that we'll know where we'll place housing for population or whatever. I think that is what will make my community engaged in the process. Thank you.
As I heard someone once saying, good internet governance begins at home. Avri?
Thank you. Actually, really very much enjoyed many of the comments that were given. Some of the ones that especially rang with me were looking for levels of commitment to multi-stakeholder. And when I heard that, I also started wondering about the sincerity of the commitment to a multi-stakeholder model. And by the way, I stay away from multi-stakeholderism because I start to think that that's a thing that's already cooked, known, understood, and over with. So I tend to think of a model that is still being learned, still evolving. When I look at the sincerity of commitment, one of the things that, for example, ICANN taught me is that all of these organizations, all of these associations, we have both the good actors and the bad actors. And that's a notion that I've started bringing to Internet governance, to the governments, the civil society, the private sector. Which of us are good actors? Which of us are bad actors? Which of us are actually working to further the model, whereas which of us are working to stymie the model and to sort of hold it back? And that's one of the questions. I'm not about to sit here and point fingers. Maybe later over a beer I'd do that, but certainly not sitting here. But I think it's something that we have to look at when we're looking at all of us getting together in a room, saying we participate openly, we participate as peers. How many of us are really doing it sincerely? How many of us really have intention of forwarding, of moving this model forward? When I look at the question of where do we go, where do we take the multi-stakeholder model, and taking the view that I've got, that we're just at the beginning of it, I would go and say, we have to bring this model to every single one of the governance functions that does not already use it. I get a little worried when I hear of, let us lead the effort and we'll include you all. ICANN was a private sector-led effort, and it's lately become a multi-stakeholder model effort, but it's still really a private sector-led. And getting beyond that to a full peerage notion is very difficult to do. So when we talk about enhanced cooperation, and enhanced cooperation is the moving beyond the talking that we do in the IGF to actually the deciding and doing, that needs to become a multi-stakeholder process. It isn't yet. It's still seen as between government and those doing governance. Well, those doing governance is all of us. So I think of moving forward in terms of moving forward to where we get to the point where governance that is not multi-stakeholder is not seen as legitimate. Now, Henriette asks a really good question, is who is accountable? And I think it's any of us that presume to sit here in this room, to open our mouths, to participate in the ICANNs, in ISOCs, in IETFs, perhaps in ITU if it becomes multi-stakeholder, that we are the ones that become accountable by sitting here and talking, by sitting here and making decisions, and it remaining open, it having remote moderators who constantly bring in the voice of the user who's not there and say, but wait a second, you're not taking into account my needs. You're not taking into account my realities. So I think it's us that has to remain accountable, and that's pretty much it.
Thank you for this. Well, we had set out, we had made quite a number of elaborate questions, but the discussion took off, and we had a great interaction also with the floor. But I think one question I would like to pose to the panel: what is the best approach to promote a multi-stakeholder approach? Like Avri, I prefer not using the word multi-stakeholderism. It sounds too abstract for me. But how to promote this approach? And one of the questions coming from the remote participants, actually, has it an economic impact? I think that is a very good question. My answer, my gut reaction to that would be yes, because it helps you take the better decisions. And I think there are also examples. And, well, why not turning to you again, Lesley? The UK is proud to be, I think, the fastest growing e-commerce market. And what factors are behind this?
Okay, thank you. Of course, as soon as we say that and feel very proud of that achievement, somebody else will overtake us. Markus is referring to a report a couple of years ago, I think, from the Boston Consulting Group, which identified the UK's internet sector as having a very high GDP, and per capita it was higher than anyone else, and I suspect we'll lose that position rapidly, I'm sure. But in the UK, the internet sector accounts for 7.2% of GDP, which is actually higher than the utilities sector, the construction sector, and so on, which is just incredible, I think, from my perspective. And so if I can kind of locate that back to multi-stakeholderism or multi-stakeholder model, I do apologise, I get a bad actor label now. For us in the UK, it's very much seeing a self-regulatory, light-touch regulation model as one of the key conditions that has enabled that growth. So in terms of a case study, having a distinct lack of regulation in this area, having a distinct lack of legislation that generally tends not to address the issue it's trying to address, has been absolutely key to that result. And also the multi-stakeholder models. So bringing those two things together, for me, I think it's about policymakers who we have to assume are trying to make good policy. They're trying to make good policy that benefits end users, businesses, and others, so that they can have economic success, particularly in the current environment. And if we can really build on that good intent and work together, then I think we have some optimism, some opportunity there. but I'm going to be totally realistic as well. So I think that there's a danger listening. I think some people think, we're all kind of not in the real world, and there does need to be a bit of real world cynicism here. I think over the next 3 to 5 years, this model is going to be sorely tested and very much needs to demonstrate its value both nationally and globally. There's some real difficult policy decisions to be made, and all of the easy policy decisions were done quite some time ago. So therefore, there will be a need for compromise, there will be a need for people to be heard, but accept that your view may not actually be able to be followed. And that's going to be a test of the model.
Thank you. Can we have a very quick last round, a sort of 30 seconds each of concluding statements, please?
On this issue, we believe, and I think I speak for some of our friends from Pakistan, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh who are here, I think engaging the government at this stage is very crucial for us. The large-scale investment that's required in basic infrastructure is not coming from the private sector where broadband internet is concerned. It's done with the telecommunications piece. They'll probably do the last mile wireless broadband. So I think at least of the 4.5 unconnected, the next 2.5 to 3 require very serious engagement with the government. What we're trying to attempt is to provide a platform where they all come and have a discussion. We don't believe any one person owns that. We need the activists there, we need the NGOs there, we need the lawyers, the government, but we believe that the government really needs to end the fact that not large numbers of government are not in today's meeting or in this meeting today in the room next door. I think is a challenge. I think we're hoping that more of them will get into these discussions, because without them, the next 3 billion is very tough.
Carlos is one of the persons who will go to the room next door to the other meeting, so you can take the message across. Please, your thoughts.
I just hope over the years when we see the multi-stakeholder model walking on the street, we can recognize it. Still too fluffy.
That's a good point. I think that the way to promote the multi-stakeholder model is just building successful cases, taking advantage of any opportunity to participate constructively, make the effort to understand each other and how to engage each other in productive cooperative work and discussions. Basically is this. Thank you.
Thank you. And I just noticed the misappropriation. My name came up on your statement, so I asked the scribes to correct that.
So you are responsible of my words now.
Thank you. Heather? Nothing to say? No.
Yeah, I think we need to get people to practice it, because it's not something you read and immediately can imagine. So every opportunity to make different people think about a problem should be encouraged. So it's education.
Thank you. You have a last 30 seconds.
Yeah, I want to say the good internet global governor will influence the internet growth in the next 20 years.
Avri?
Yeah, thank you. I think that we have to keep striving. We have to keep, as it were, knocking or perhaps pounding on all those doors to make sure that I am sure that the word multi-stakeholder will remain, whether it's just something that's paid lip service to or whether it's something that's real, is up to us to make sure that it happens.
That was a nice link to the introduction. Pounding on the doors, that's where we started 10 years ago. And I think we have made progress since. The stakeholders are in the room now. Well, I think we are just about to conclude the session. I think it was a great panel. I would like to thank all the panelists and thank you on the floor participating. My conclusion is that the multi-stakeholder model is here to stay, that we go with the tide of history and the governments will have to adapt and to talk to other stakeholders. It helps them make the better decisions. We are not there yet. It's by no means perfect, but I think I've felt the sense there's an energy in the room to work to improve the model as we go along to reach Internet Governance 2.0. With that, I would like to thank you all and wish you bon appétit. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. That is the end of our opening roundtable here. Thank you to all participants here at the roundtable for this panel discussion. Maybe we can give them one more big round of applause. Also to our moderator, Markus Kummer. Thank you.